Day my son-in-law shook hands with everyone in that conference room except me. I knew exactly what kind of man he was. He didn't even look at me. Just moved right past my chair like I was part of the furniture. $41 of bad coffee on the table, 12 people in the room, and I was the only one he skipped. I noticed. I always noticed things like that. My name is Warren Calloway. I was 56 years old, and I had spent 29 years building Meridian Health Partners from a 3-person billing operation in a strip mall in suburban Columbus, Ohio, into one of the largest privately held hospital management networks in the Midwest. 7 facilities, 4,000 employees, contracts with the VA, with Medicare, with 3 different state Medicaid programs. I didn't just work there. I was there before there was a there to work at. The founder, my father-in-law, started the company in 1993 out of desperation more than vision. His brother had a small clinic that was hemorrhaging money. He asked if I could help clean up the books. I was 27, just finished my MBA, working as a junior analyst at a healthcare consulting firm. I said yes because I needed the experience and because I was dating his daughter. 6 months later, the clinic turned a profit for the first time in 4 years. A year after that, we had a second location. The founder had the vision. I had the spreadsheets, the contracts, the compliance filings, the late nights. His daughter married me in 1996, and I think somewhere in there he started to think of me as a son. Not the son he had wanted. He had a real son, younger, smart in the way that people who've never struggled are smart, but something close enough. The real son's name was Chandler. He came into the company in 2018 with a freshly printed Wharton degree, a wardrobe that cost more than my first car, and opinions about everything. He had good ideas, I'll give him that. He understood digital infrastructure, value-based care models, the kind of things that weren't even concepts when I was building the foundation. But he also had the specific arrogance of someone who had read about a battlefield without ever standing on one. My wife and I had been married 27 years by then. We had 2 kids of our own, a house we'd paid off in Worthington, a life we'd built together while I spent half my time in windowless conference rooms negotiating contracts with federal bureaucrats. She was proud of what I'd done. She understood the cost of it. Our kids understood too, mostly. What nobody fully understood was the legal architecture I had put in place in 2007. That was the year the founder almost lost everything. A malpractice cascade at our Springfield facility, 3 unrelated cases inside 18 months, triggered a liability review that threatened to unwind our entire Medicare certification. I spent 8 months working with outside counsel, a brilliant healthcare attorney named Moss, who operated out of a small firm in Cincinnati, to restructure the company's governance and ownership in a way that would protect the certification and limit the liability exposure. It was complicated work, boring almost from the outside, the kind of thing nobody pays attention to because nothing explodes, but inside that restructuring was a clause. The founder wanted to give me something at the time. He'd said it himself, sitting across from me in his office with the afternoon light coming through the blinds. "Warren, I want you to know what you mean to this company. I want that in writing." Moss drafted language into the operating agreement, a provision tied specifically to my role as Chief Operating Officer that stated, if I were terminated without cause, or if the company were sold or merged without my written consent while I was an active officer, I retain the right to reacquire the operational licenses for 3 of our 7 facilities at their 2007 assessed value. The 2007 assessed value. The 2007 value. We shook hands. The founder signed it. I signed it. They went into the operating agreement, got filed with the Ohio Secretary of State, and then life kept moving and I didn't think about it again for 16 years. Chandler started pushing for change the moment he made it to the C-suite. That's what he called it, change. He restructured the marketing department. He brought in a tech vendor to replace our billing system, which caused 4 months of payment delays and nearly got us dropped from 2 insurance networks. He hired a consulting firm out of Chicago that spent $300,000 telling us things I already knew. He liked to stand at the head of the table and talk about transformation while the people who had been running this company for decades sat quietly and nodded. My relationship with my wife got complicated during this period. She loved her brother. She understood what I thought of him, even when I didn't say it plainly. And there was a tension between us that we managed mostly by not talking about it directly. She was in the middle. I tried to respect that. What I couldn't respect was the meeting on a Tuesday in March. The founder had been stepping back from operations for a few years. His health wasn't great, nothing catastrophic, Just the slow accumulation of age and stress that hits men who built things with their hands and their brains and their time. He still came in a few days a week. He still had his name on the building. But Chandler had effectively taken over as CEO, and the board, which had been quietly reshaped over the preceding 18 months to include several of Chandler's preferred appointments, had given him real authority. I walked into that Tuesday meeting expecting a quarterly operations review. Instead, I found 12 people and a prepared agenda I hadn't been shown in advance. Chandler was at the head of the table. He was wearing a blue suit I'd seen before. He didn't shake my hand. He got through 20 minutes of preliminary items, and then he said, calmly, like he'd rehearsed it, which I'm sure he had, "Warren, as part of our strategic realignment, we've made the decision to restructure the COO position. We're moving to a distributed operational model, and we'll be eliminating the role effective the end of the month. HR will be in touch today with your separation package." I looked around the room. Most of the faces were new. The ones that weren't, the ones who had been here long enough to know what I'd done, wouldn't meet my eyes. I said, "Is this without cause?" Chandler said. "It's a structural change. The role is being eliminated." I said, "That's not what I asked." There was a pause. He said, "There's no performance issue, Warren. This is organizational restructuring." I picked up my portfolio, stood up, and said, "Okay." That was it. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I shook the hands of the two people near the door who extended theirs, and I walked out of that building and sat in my car in the parking garage for 45 minutes. My phone started ringing about an hour after I got home. Colleagues. Friends inside the company. My wife called from her office, voice tight, saying she was sorry, saying she'd had no idea. I believed her. I still believe her. Her brother hadn't told her in advance. Whether that was consideration or cowardice, I was never sure. I didn't return most of the calls that day. I went to the kitchen. I made coffee. I sat at the table where I'd eaten breakfast for 22 years, and I thought about 2007. The operating agreement was in a fireproof safe in my home office. I'd put it there when we moved into this house in 2004, and I'd never moved it because I never needed to. I went upstairs, opened the safe, and pulled out the binder. Still there. The relevant section was on page 47, paragraph 9, C, drafted by Moss, signed by the founder, notarized, filed. I read it 3 times. Then I called Moss. He'd retired from his firm but still did occasional consulting work. He picked up on the 3rd ring. I told him what had happened. He asked me to scan and send him the relevant pages. I did. He called me back in 40 minutes. He said, "Warren, the language is clear. What they've done, eliminating the position without cause, triggers the reversionary rights. The 2007 values are embedded in the operating agreement. This was filed with the state. It's part of the corporate record." I said, "How do we move on this?" He said, "Carefully and quickly, before they realize what they've done." Here is what Chandler didn't know, because he had never read the 2007 operating agreement with any real attention. He had reviewed a summary when he came aboard, the way young executives review summaries of things they find boring. He had restructured the board. He had reshaped the company's direction, but he had not quietly sat in the law library for a weekend in 2007, building the legal scaffolding that held the whole structure together. The 3 facilities covered by my reversionary rights were not minor locations. One was our flagship facility in Columbus, the largest revenue generator in the network. One was our Dayton campus, which held 3 of our 5 VA contracts. The third was a specialty surgical center in Cincinnati that we'd built from the ground up in 2011 and which accounted for nearly a third of our total operating margin. The company was currently in active negotiations to be acquired by a national healthcare conglomerate headquartered in Nashville. The deal was valued at approximately $840 million. The acquisition had been Chandler's project for the past 14 months. It was the thing he was most proud of. It was the thing he was going to close. Without those 3 facilities, the deal was worth considerably less. Without those 3 facilities under the acquiring company's control, the VA contracts, which required specific operational license continuity, would need to be renegotiated from scratch. The Nashville company's lawyers almost certainly knew this. It was almost certainly in their due diligence. Moss connected me with a healthcare transactions attorney at a firm in Cleveland who specialized in exactly this kind of dispute. Her name was Patricia Webb. No, actually, I need to think of different names. Her name was Lorraine Dupree, and she was sharp in the way that people who have spent 20 years doing quietly complex work become sharp, Precise, unhurried, no wasted words. She reviewed the operating agreement over a weekend, and on Monday morning she said, "This is enforceable. The question is whether you want to enforce it and how." I said, "I want them to know I can." She said, "That's the right answer. We send notice to the board, not to Chandler. The board needs to understand what's at stake before the Nashville deal closes." We filed a formal notice with the company's registered agent on a Thursday afternoon. By Thursday evening, I had 17 missed calls. By Friday morning, 22 more. My son-in-law, who had not spoken to me since the meeting where he'd eliminated my position, called 4 times. I didn't answer any of them. My wife came home that Friday evening and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. She looked tired in the way that had nothing to do with the day. She said, "Chandler says you're trying to blow up the company." I said, "I'm exercising a right that has been part of the company's legal structure for 16 years. She said, "Warren." I said, "He fired me, Liz. Without cause, after 29 years, without telling you first, without telling your father." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did Dad know about this clause?" I said, "He signed it." She got up and called her father. The founder came over the next morning. He walked in looking older than I remembered and sat at the same kitchen table. He had a copy of the operating agreement in his hand. I don't know who'd gotten it to him. He looked at page 47 for a long time. He said, "I remember this." I said, "I know you do." He said, "I meant what I said when we signed it. I still mean it." I said, "Then help me make sure the board understands what this means." The board called an emergency session the following Tuesday. Lorraine and I attended in person. Chandler was there. He looked at me the way he had in the original meeting, like he was waiting for me to accept the outcome already handed to me. He had a team of attorneys from the firm handling the Nashville acquisition. They'd clearly spent the weekend looking for a way out of the provision, and they had clearly not found one. Their lead attorney, a man in his 50s who had the bearing of someone who had been expensive for a long time, said that the reversionary clause was legally ambiguous and that the elimination of a position was structurally distinct from termination without cause. Lorraine let him finish. Then she pulled out the filing from the Ohio Secretary of State's office, the 2007 version, the original, not a copy, and walked through the language paragraph by paragraph. The clause defined termination without cause to explicitly include elimination of the officer's position for reasons other than gross misconduct. That language was in there because I had asked Moss to put it there in 2007, because I had been doing this long enough to know how these things were usually handled. The room was quiet when she finished. Chandler said, "This is extortion." I said, "No. Extortion is when someone threatens to take something that isn't theirs. These licenses are mine. I've been mine for 16 years. I'm simply letting the board know I'd like to exercise my rights." The founder said, from the end of the table, quietly, "Chandler, stop." It took 3 weeks to negotiate the resolution. Lorraine was excellent throughout. The terms we reached were not what Chandler had wanted, and not fully what I had demanded. They were, as these things usually are, something in between. I agreed not to exercise the reversionary rights and to release the licenses to proceed with the Nashville acquisition. In exchange, a settlement that the confidentiality agreement prevents me from specifying in dollar terms, though I will say it was substantial. A formal written acknowledgement from the board that my termination had been without cause, and a provision in the acquisition agreement itself, visible to the Nashville company, part of the permanent record, that credited my role in building the 3 facilities and establishing the VA contract portfolio. That last part was not something Lorraine suggested. It was something I asked for specifically. I wanted it in writing. I wanted it in a document that would outlast the company name, that would be visible to the new owners, that would be part of whatever Meridian Health Partners became going forward. I had spent 29 years making sure other people's names were on buildings while I filed the paperwork that kept the lights on. I was not willing to disappear quietly from this one. My wife and I went through a hard stretch after everything settled. That's the part people don't usually talk about in these stories. Chandler was her brother. The founder was her father. The company had been her family's name for 30 years. What I had done was legally unimpeachable. What it had cost us personally was something that took longer to sort out. We went to counseling for about 6 months. We talked more honestly than we had in years. She said things I needed to hear about how much I had given to that company and how little I had let anyone help me carry it. I said things she needed to hear about the ways I had let the work stand in for presence, for conversation, for the kind of attention that a marriage needs to stay alive. We're okay now. Better than okay, actually. I retired fully at the end of that year. We sold the house in Worthington and bought something smaller in Asheville. The kids come to visit. There's a porch where I drink coffee in the morning and don't think about Medicare reimbursement rates. The Nashville acquisition closed. Meridian Health Partners, under the terms of the deal, was rebranded. The new name is on the letterhead, but the acknowledgement document is in the permanent record. My name is on the VA contracts. It's on the 2007 operating agreement. It's on 31 years of financial filings. Some things you don't need to fight to keep. They're already there, embedded in the record, waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. The founder called me last spring, just to talk, the way we used to before everything got complicated. He said he was sorry for how it ended. I said I was sorry for some of it too. He said, "You built something real, Warren." I said, "We did." That was enough. That was more than enough. There's something nobody tells you about the years you spend building something that doesn't have your name on the front door. You stop expecting credit. You get good at it, actually, at doing the work without needing the acknowledgement, at finding satisfaction in the thing itself rather than in how people see you doing it. That's not a weakness. For a long time, I thought it was just who I was. Now, I think it was something I had to unlearn. What Chandler did wasn't just arrogance. It was a specific kind of carelessness, the kind that comes from never having had to earn anything in a room where people could say no to you. He walked into that conference room and eliminated 29 years like he was updating a line item on a spreadsheet. And the truth is, men like Chandler get away with it constantly. They get away with it because the people they do it to are too tired or too dignified or too afraid of the fight to push back. I almost let him get away with it too. What stopped me wasn't anger. Anger was there, sure, sitting in my car in that parking garage, but anger alone doesn't win anything. What stopped him was something I had built quietly, carefully, 16 years earlier. A clause in a document nobody had bothered to read. I had read it. I had asked Moss to put specific language in it because I had been around long enough to know that goodwill fades and memory is convenient. That's not cynicism. That's clarity. Knowing how the world actually works and preparing accordingly. That's the kind of intelligence that doesn't show up on a Wharton transcript. I think about integrity a lot now, on that porch in Asheville with the coffee going cold. Not the word the way people throw it around, but the actual thing. The alignment between what you believe is right and what you do when it costs you something. I could have used that clause to destroy the acquisition entirely. I had the legal standing. Lorraine told me plainly that I could, but that wasn't the point. The point was acknowledgement. The point was that the record reflect what was true, that my name and what I had contributed not be quietly erased to make a balance sheet look cleaner. There's a difference between justice and destruction, and knowing that difference, holding to it when you have the power to do either. That's the part I'm most at peace with. The hard part was Liz. That's where the real cost was, and I don't want to gloss over it. 27 years of marriage, and I had to make a decision that put her between her husband and her brother, her loyalty and her family's legacy. We got through it because we were honest with each other in ways we hadn't been in years. That honesty took effort. The kind of sustained, unglamorous effort that doesn't look like strength from the outside, but absolutely is. She did it. I did it. We showed up to those counseling sessions and said the true things. That took more out of me than any board meeting ever did. What I want anyone to take from this is simple. Document what you build. Understand the agreements you sign, all of them, not just the ones that seem important at the time. And when someone tries to walk away with something that's yours, don't beg. Don't rage. Know your rights. Find people smarter than you in the right rooms and let the work you did speak at full volume. Chandler thought he was closing a chapter. He didn't realize I was the one holding the pen.